Hello and welcome to tonight's Truth Proof live stream. Now, have we got a show for you tonight? You've probably read the banner, so we've got a great guest on tonight. I've got to thank everybody for joining us on the chat. I can see the chat now, and I'd just like to welcome a few names to tonight's stream. And we have, looks like we have Newsy Brown, Mally Dodgson, Alison Buttle, and V McCrinnan. Twitchy Curtains, Lorraine Grooves, and see if I can find a new one, MKMD Exploration. Welcome to the show, guys. We have a nickname in the chat, Tim Brennan, and I'm sure, have I missed anybody else? If I've missed anybody out, then I apologise for that. Right then, we've got to welcome Sky Flower, who is doing the moderating tonight. So welcome to the show, Sky. And let's hope your first one's going to be a good one. Without further ado, I think we'll kick off with our intro. Like I say, welcome back, and I've got to thank everybody for all the support in the recent months. We really appreciate it, but without further ado, without me twaddling on any longer, if that's a real word, then I'll hand it over to Paul to welcome tonight's guest. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Les. And the week soon comes round, and we've got a fabulous guest tonight, Jim Goodall, retired Master's Sergeant, aviation expert, and I would like to say, more importantly, for Jim in particular, SR-71 Blackbird Authority. Would I be right in saying that, Jim? And welcome to Truth Proof.
Well, you'd be correct in saying that. I mean, I joined the Air Force in 1962 because I loved airplanes, and I actually didn't have a choice to join the military, but that's another story. And on March 10th, 1964, I was at temporary duty, it's referred to as TDY, to Edwards Air Force Base from Lowry Air Force Base in Denver. And I was there to support 3 programs. I was 18 years old, and I was there because I was a ground-based telemetry specialist. And I was there for Category 1 testing for 3 different programs. 2 were acknowledged: the YC-141 Starlifter, the XB-70 Valkyrie, and at the time a classified program. Well, it turns out that classified program was the Blackbird. I got goosebumps just thinking about it.
Just before you go on, Jim, telemetry, are we talking communications?
Yes.
Yeah, right.
I didn't have anything to do with the airborne equipment. I was there with the ground-based equipment, making sure that we can get back to the main computers and stuff like that. But on March 10th, 1964, at about 3:15 p.m. local time, I heard a roar coming from south of where I was at, and I was getting ready to board the Northrop shuttle. It was an Italian Piaggio. It's a gull wing pusher type. And I ran down the taxiway to see where the noise was coming from, and all the debris being blown across Rogers Dry Lake. And at first I thought it was the X-15 because the fire coming out of the back was just, it was unbelievable. But the people were too small. And about that time they said, "Hey, we're loading the airplane." Oh, crap. So I went running up, got in the airplane, and we took off down the taxiway and right over Rogers Dry Lake. We didn't use the runway. And as we came, we banked over where this black airplane was, and I looked down on top of the world's fastest, only Mach 3 qualified airplane in the world, the Blackbird. And it wasn't an SR-71, it wasn't an A-12, it was the fighter version, it was the YF-12. Had all the same capabilities. I mean, I couldn't believe my eyes. I mean, I was just blown away. And it was on a Tuesday, and I had the rest of the week off because I had, done a lot of overtime on the weekends. And it was Easter. It was heading towards Easter weekend in Newport Beach, California, and I just wanted to go there and have fun. And so I came back the following Monday, and I was handed my work orders. It was for the Lockheed hangar, and I walked into the Lockheed hangar, staring at the back of two Blackbirds, and I have never been the same. And that led from one thing to another. That led to my passion for the Blackbird. And most everything that's developed, they try to develop in secrecy. It's my job as a taxpayer to know where my money is being spent. So I had once I got out of the Air Force, I was out 10 years and I went back in the military. But in 1968, I sent letters to Air Force, to Lockheed, Department of Defense, the CIA, asking for, and I was willing to pay the published rate. I wanted a half a dozen 8x10 color glossies of the Blackbird, and their official policy was not to cooperate. So because they didn't cooperate, I started digging. The more I dug, the more I found out. The more I found out, the deeper I dug. So over the course of the last 60 years, I've accumulated probably as much historical knowledge on the Blackbird program that there is. And I also, and I don't know how it happened, but I became not necessarily a pen pal, but Ben Rich, who replaced Kelly Johnson at the Skunk Works. He and I had but every 90 days, he would either call me or I would call him just to shoot the bull, to see what's new and exciting. He could be in a business meeting or an engineering meeting in his office. I would call June, his secretary, always recognized my voice. Said, "Just Mr. Goodall, I'll connect you with Mr. Rich." And he would put me on speakerphone. I could tell there was half a dozen people in his office just by background noise. And we'd talk for 15, 20, 30. I think the longest we ever talked was about 45 minutes.
Really?
He loved my passion for all things Blackbird and pretty much all things Lockheed Skunk Works.
So, right, I'm glad you said that word. Just for some of our listeners, Skunk Works, just give an overview of what Skunk Works.
Well, the Lockheed Skunk Works was, I just did a book on it, and it's published by Osprey, so you can get it for £50 sterling, I think, there in the UK. During World War II, we decided, the United States government decided they needed a jet to compete with the ME-262 and the ME-163 Comet. And so they went out for competition. Bell had the P-59, and Lockheed came up with the XP-80. Flew in 1943. It actually saw combat in August in the Mediterranean. I think it was North Africa, and that created a special team of engineers. And from signing a contract to first flight I think it was 143 days. And it's just, it became a very specialized design group within Lockheed. And at the time, it was Lockheed California, because Lockheed had operations all over the U.S.
143 days between designing and flying.
Signing the contract.
Signing the contract.
Yeah,
that's incredible.
The U-2 was, I think, 100 plus days, which is really amazing. The Blackbird, from signing a contract to first flight, was 32 months. Now, the United States Air Force today can't change the paint scheme on a C-130 in 32 months.
No, that's what I was getting at. Like, everything seems to take longer, doesn't it? It's incredible.
Ben Rich told me, and I have a lot of Ben Rich stories. Ben Rich told me that when they built the original Blackbird, the A-12, the Oxcart airplane, they had about 250 security people were assigned to the program. And when they built the F-117, 40 years or 50 years later, it'd be 40 years later, the they had about the same number of production people, about a little bit more than the original total Blackbird production, and they had 2,500 security people for basically the same type of job.
Yeah.
And Ben told me that when you're dealing with classified programs, security accounts for about 20 to 25% of the total cost of the program.
Right.
And it's insane. And most of the reasons why it's classified, and it probably goes along the same with the UK, is they don't want the bean counters to know what they're doing. It has nothing to do with national security. It's how, it's protecting their pot of gold at the end of
the money, yeah.
end of the rainbow. So like a good example, when the F-117 first flew in June of 81, they figured that they could keep it classified for maybe 15 months, 18 months on the outside. Someone's going to see it. Someone's going to photograph it. Well, they hit 18 months, not a peep anywhere. They hit 24 months, nothing. So they said, let's see how long we can keep it classified so the world doesn't know what it is. So it wasn't until November 1988, seven years later, that the world found out about the F-117.
Right. So
go on.
When did the blueprint for Blackbird first get developed? I mean, because you're telling me, did you say 1964 that it were first shown? Am I correct?
Well, that's when I first saw it, but the first airplane flew on April 26, 1962 at Area 51. And the contract was signed in September of 59.
Right.
And so you didn't have, there wasn't a lot of time, but Kelly Johnson's idea of how to run the Skunk Works, he gives the decision-making process down to the lowest common denominator. So if you're just a wrench turner or a sheet metal guy and you found a better way to do something, you could walk right into his office because his door was always open.
Right.
And say, hey, I got this or I got that. Or you had a problem, you go into Kelly's office, said, this widget that will not, will not go into this left-handed widget connection. What do I do? Kelly would go right out onto the
shop
assembly
floor
manufacturing floor, look at it, figure it out, and it was fixed right then and there. And then they'd go if there was changes to drawings and everything, that was always noted and it was corrected. But he just walked out there and did everything he could to make sure that there wasn't a hang up because a decision had to be made. A young guy make a decision. He came back, verified it. Hey, let's go forward. So,
and that is why things got done so fast, obviously, because in today's world that we're in today, we would have a dozen people debating it in a boardroom, and then there'd be health and safety people put in place to see whether it could be done, and and everything takes time and eats into budget. You can quite understand why things got done so fast.
Well, it's the Skunk Works operates almost a lot like Elon Musk and his rockets.
Yeah.
And if NASA would have had their Starship take off, come down, crash, they would have a 2-year to 4-year evaluation and investigation what caused the crash. It crashed. Elon says, I think I know what the problem is. Fixed it. And was it 10 days later, they launched another one. It came down. It crashed because it didn't have enough fuel. So, okay, we're learning. So that's how you learn. If you don't break something, you're not pushing the envelope.
No, it's true. Just jumping back to the first time you saw the aircraft, And you said
Yes.
it had this profound effect on you. Did it have that effect on a lot of people, or do you think it's
I
stuck
think
with?
I think anybody who has been associated with the Blackbird, anybody who has had the privilege and the honor to get up close and personal to the airplane, or just seen it in an air show, that is, I mean, it is a 107-foot long, 140,000-pound craft that's faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and able to leap tall buildings on a single bound. It's not Superman, but if he had an airplane, it would. That's what it would be.
It looks like something from Star Wars, really, doesn't it? It's an incredible feat of engineering. What's it made of? Is it titanium, or what's the skin?
Well, they built 50 Blackbirds total. They had 15 A-12s. They had 3 YF-12s. That was the interceptor, and they had 31 SR-71s, 2 B models and a C model. The SR-71s, the 25 operational SR-71s were all built with Soviet Union supplied titanium sponge.
Right.
That's how they make. And they thought it was, they needed, the Russians or the Soviets at the time needed hard currency. They didn't have it. We needed their titanium. So that's the reason why the aft fuselage on the F-104 is titanium. There had to be something out there that had a lot of titanium on it so the Russians wouldn't get suspicious. Why are you buying all this titanium sponge from us? Yeah, it was for the Blackbird. And almost everything about the airplane is primarily by weight. It would be titanium, would be over 80%, 90%. Most of the chine panels and the leading edge and trailing edge are composite, and it's made of a material that is politically incorrect today. The chines and everything, they have to withstand temperatures up to 800 degrees, even higher in some areas on the airplane. And the fabric they used on the composite panels is silica asbestos. So as long as you don't cut it or sand it like they did on the one on the USS Intrepid, you're not going to expose anybody from that evil natural occurring rock called asbestos. So I'm surprised. Initially, they wanted the Air Force, and Larry Welsh at the time, he was Air Force Chief of Staff and hated the program. He was turned down when he was a major to fly it. He wasn't a good enough pilot, and he never forgot that. And that's one of the reasons it was canceled, but that's another story. I mean, everything about the airplane is special. Everything about the fuels. Kelly Johnson said, I'd give $100. And back in 1960, 61, 62 time frame, $100 was probably the equivalent of about $1,500 today. Okay. He said, anybody who can take a pound of weight out of the airplane, I'll give you $100. And when the program was retired, he still had that $100 in his pocket. Of course, he'd been dead for a while.
So everything was so tight and honed on this aircraft that it was impossible to take any more off it without compromising it.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, it's and everything about the program was special. The fuels, I mean, when the first SR-71 went to its first open house in Washington, D.C. at Andrews Air Force Base, and this was early 70s, early to mid 70s. And they got the senior NCO on the fuel crew. He's sitting on the fuel cart. You'll see it on a flight line. It's usually it looks like a water mule that you would take somewhere, but it's painted yellow and it has JP4 or JP7 or Jet A on it, and they use it for taking off excess. And he sees the fire marshal coming. And he's leaning back and he said, okay, I'm going to pull this guy's chain. He pulls out a cigarette and lights the cigarette. Now he's sitting on the fuel cart. And the fire inspector says, what in the hell? He put that thing out, and he gets it and he flicks it into the pans of fuel underneath the airplane. And the guy hit the deck, and he's an E8. He was a senior master sergeant. He's just laughing. He said, that stuff is non-flammable. You can put it in a fire extinguisher to put out fires. That's
Really?
how non-flammable it is. So he lost 2 stripes. And I think about 30 days later, they gave it back to him because it was a funny prank. And it was, you know,
Well, I bet he thought you were going to die, though. That the other guy.
yeah,
Didn't
and there's, you know, and there's a lot of stuff like that, you know, about the Blackbird. So it's just an absolutely incredible airplane.
I'm thinking. Let's go back to your childhood for a while.
Sure.
Tell us about the aircraft hangar, and you got inside the cockpit of.
Oh yeah. Okay. For those who don't know, I grew up what is now Silicon Valley. I grew up right on the Mountain View, Los Altos city limits. 1 street over was Los Altos. Our street was Mountain View. But my best friend, his dad was base commander at Moffett Field Naval Air Station. So I would go over there on weekends, you know, during school time, and then spend a lot of time there during the summer. And we were always referred to as Captain Smith's son and that friend of his, because we were. So you know, I was over there one day, and he said, "Oh my gosh, you should see what's in the big hangar." And that's Hangar 1. You know, that's the big Zeppelin or blimp hangar. And we pretty much had a run of the base. We were invisible to most everybody because we were always out there on our bikes. We were never on the taxiways, and we were never on the runways. But in the hangars and all the roads, we rode our bicycle everywhere. And he said, "There's something so cool in the big hangar, you got to see it." And I was 10 or 11, 1954, 55, 56 time frame. I could nail it down if I needed to, but it's irrelevant. So, you know, we'd ride our bikes, you know, through the hangar. And guys are waving off. They knew who we were. And at the far end, closest to the bay, was an area, and they had some black curtains and a keep out sign. It didn't say use of deadly force authorized. That's sort of a new thing. And so we parked our bikes and we went behind the curtain, and there was nobody there guarding it. And there was the still secret XF-104 Starfighter. It'd been in the which is now NASA, but it was NACA, the Ames Research Wind Tunnel Complex, and it'd been in there. And we walked around it, and it was just, I mean, to see a bright, shiny. This was out of Star Wars, if there was such thing as Star Wars back then for a kid my age. And you know, we didn't want to run into the leading edge because they said they were razor sharp. Well, they're sharp, but they're not razor sharp. But they don't, you know, they had edge protectors. They just didn't want them dinged. So Danny said, "Hey, get in the cockpit." Sure. So we opened the canopy, put the loading ladder, you know, the boarding ladder up, opened the canopy. I got in, closed the canopy, and I'm in there about 2 minutes. And all of a sudden, I'm getting a little bit panicked. I'm sitting into something that I know I shouldn't be sitting in. And it's getting a little bit claustrophobic. So I tried to open the canopy, and it jammed. I couldn't open it. Danny couldn't open it from his side, and we were beside ourselves. So Danny had to go get some maintenance people and some shore patrol sailors, and even some marine guards. And they came in, and Danny and I just weren't strong enough to move that thing over, because it was a man could do it, but a kid, a 10-year-old, would have a hard time. And my butt still hurts, you know, almost 70 years later.
Well, so you did get into trouble then. Yeah.
Oh yes, yeah, we got chewed out really, really good. And and that was the beginning of my passions on Skunk Works airplanes. I mean, it started at a young age, and the U-2 is probably one of its most famous products. Then came the Blackbird, and then came the 117. I don't see the F-22 as anything extraordinary, other than it's, you know, an evolution of 5th generation fighters, and same with the F-35. But it's pretty amazing when I mentioned it. It's 32 months from signing a contract to first flight. I saw the X-35 Ironbird at Palmdale in August of 1990. It's 30 years, 32 years. And it's still not considered fully mission capable. You know, it doesn't have the block, I think F4 or block 4F software, and they won't for probably another couple of years. And when they first started flying, you know, they had no ability to drop weapons or even use the gun because the software hadn't been fully developed. But that just goes to show you where you can come from. 32 months building a plane that only 15 years earlier had gone Mach 1 in a rocket-powered X-1. That was Chuck Yeager. And they were building an airplane to fly sustained Mach 3. And
just flat out, that's what it's rolled to fly at the cutting edge all the time.
Yeah, the airplane was designed from the beginning to fly at Mach 3.24. That is the optimum speed for the airplane. That's where it gives the best gas mileage. A good example, Ken Collins was taking an SR-71 to Kadena, Okinawa. He's going Mach 3 the whole way. You know, he tanked up about, right after he took off, and he was another air refueling out of Hickam, and then he would hit Okinawa. And he was about halfway to Hawaii, and he lost his stabilization augmentation system, which you really can't fly the airplane without it. You're moving through the air at 3,200 to 3,400 feet per second. I mean, that's faster than a speeding bullet. Mm-hmm. And at that speed, the SAS, the stabilization augmentation system, flies it. Yeah, a good example of how the stability of the airplane, the Blackbird is like trying to balance a 4x8 sheet of plywood on a broomstick. Excuse me.
All right.
I'm Italian, so I talk with my hands. And that to balance that, I mean, it's very critical, and you can't have, ooh, what was that? Or
no. So what you just touched on its capabilities then.
Yeah.
And I'm sure people are just as interested. Primarily, Jim, we talk about the UFOs and the unexplained, but I know we'll lead on to some of that. But let's just stay with Blackbird. Sure. Give us an example of, its maximum capabilities, as in speed.
Well, and I was just informed that an SR-71 had flown or reached at 90,000 feet. I was under the impression, interviewing guys who flew it in flight test, that 87,250 was as high as they went. But we're only talking in the 3,500 feet difference. The airplane was designed from the very beginning to fly Mach 3.24, which is about 95 to 96% of its full range. The fastest an SR-71 has ever flown was with Bill Weaver. He was an SR-71 974. That was actually the last one lost on the Philippines in April of '89. And the 974 was the best flying of all the airplanes. But Bill Weaver and his backseater they were flying the 974 out of Palmdale. At the time, it was assigned as a Palmdale airplane, flight test airplane. So they had finished their test guard. They left Edwards. They had air refuel. They had flown over Amarillo, over the Gulf. Did a big turn, came back, and on the way back, the test guard was done. Everything was running good. They had adequate fuel. Everything was perfect. The outside temperature was optimum. So they called Palmdale and asked if he could run it out. Because at Mach 3.2 at 85,000 feet, you are in minimum afterburner. The airplane just wants to fly fast. So Bill Weaver's decided, okay, I'm gonna run it out, see what happens. So he just pushed the throttles all the way forward, and off he went. And at Mach 3.43, he had a dual unstart. He said it was like hitting a brick wall. If he hadn't been, harnessed in his election seat, he'd probably gone through the windscreen. He said his backseater wet himself
Right.
because he thought they'd lost the airplane, and he did immediately aborted the flight. It got down to a reasonable speed. Was the airplane, the SR came out of the unstart. Now, an unstart is when 99.9% of the supersonic airplanes built, the shock wave is outside the inlet. On the Blackbird, the shock wave is just inside the inlet. And in 20 feet, you're going from 3,200, 3,400 feet per second to subsonic when it hits the face of the first stage of the Pratt & Whitney J58. And in that area, you also, due to compression and friction, you raise the temperature of the air from minus 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 830 degrees Fahrenheit. So you have a rise of 900 degrees Fahrenheit in 20 feet due to compression and friction. Everything about that airplane is special, absolutely everything. And what happens when you have an unstart, the engine at Mach 3.2, the engine only produces 18% of the thrust. The rest of the thrust comes from the inlet and the exhaust ejector. So it's starting about Mach 1.4, they start, the inlet cones start moving back, and they move back 26 inches. And it's sort of a banana type shaft they run on, because they're pointed inward and down about 2 degrees when they go back. At speed and altitude, the Blackbird is sucking in about 2 million cubic feet of air per second. I mean, that's sucking a lot of air. I mean, there's only 0.4% of the atmosphere up there, so there isn't a whole lot. And but the airplane wants to run fast. Like I was saying earlier, when Ken Collins lost his SAS, his stabilization augmentation system, he had to abort the flight and head back to Beale. He actually used twice as much fuel flying back to Beale than he did going to the turn point. And he's going Mach 3 up to that point, and he was going subsonic back. So the airplane is much more efficient at Mach 3.2. And it has a super cruise capability if you ever wanted to use it. You can, once you get up above Mach 1, you could actually back out of the afterburner, and the airplane would maintain its speed up to about 1.3, 1.4.
Incredible. And
yeah, everything about it is incredible. And
obviously, the aircraft's also, I would imagine, very loud.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Yeah. So if we just jump to UFO subject for a moment, it wouldn't have ever got mistaken for an unidentified flying object, would it? As we would perceive something from another sphere of existence, should we say?
I mean, a good example of the level of secrecy and how they try to get it. There was a United Airlines flight from the East Coast to San Francisco, and this is like in 1962, 63 timeframe. It was still top secret, not secret, but top secret, compartmentalized, and they got a glimpse of. Actually, they flew fairly close to an A-12 Blackbird, and it had an F-104 chase plane, and they just they took pictures of it, talked about it. When they landed in San Francisco, the airplane was stopped on the away from the gate, and the FBI or probably Air Force OSI people got on the airplane, talked, interviewed the pilot. Actually, the pilot, co-pilot, and the flight engineer were all commandeered. They were sequestered in separate rooms and interrogated for about 4 or 5 hours. None of the passengers managed to see it. At least they didn't acknowledge it. So they finally, after 4 or 5 hours, the cockpit crew is let loose. About 4 months, 5 months later, the same captain with a different first officers flying again from the East Coast to San Francisco, and they see an A-12 again, and the first officer says, "Oh my God, I gotta get my camera, take a picture of that." And he said, Don't waste your time. And I hope you had no plans when we get to San Francisco. We're going to be interrogated for the next 4 to 5 hours.
So what level of secrecy?
Yes.
Yeah. So obviously, with absolutely incredible capabilities of this aircraft, are there any encounters or stories that you know that this aircraft has encountered anything unknown?
Absolutely. Yeah. When I was working on my Blackbird book, and that's from Sheffer Publishing, and I'm very proud of it. The recently retired Jeff Babion, who's the head of the Skunk Works, his 2 favorite books in the world are my Blackbird book from Sheffer and my 75 years at the Lockheed Skunk Works from Osprey. But it's just a second. My mouth is dry.
No problem.
So I was going around interviewing guys who had crashed Blackbirds. Yeah, they built 50 Blackbirds. They lost 20 of them.
No, what a question I was going to ask you, actually. How many were left? But yeah.
None to combat related. Most of them were either mechanical failures or screw ups from ground crew or air crew. But I was interviewing Dave Fruhoff, the lieutenant colonel, sharp guy. He was one of the earlier pilots flying the program. And so I kind of got to close some out. And I interviewed him about the crash. He was in the SR-71B that had a total electrical failure over Montana. They couldn't land at Glasgow because of a blizzard. The same with Francis Warren and Mountain Home. It was just the weather was just terrible, so they decided to head back to Beale. And this is a student pilot. Dave was a student pilot, and I can't remember who the instructor pilot was. And they were going through their checklist, and they said, well, the checklist said that, and they're talking to intercom. They don't have radio. They've I think they announced an emergency, but it was brief. So they're heading back. They had all the electrical is gone, so they're going by the seat of their pants. They're coming in. Finally, they decided we're gonna land at Beale. Now the tech orders said that the engines would suck fuel from the sump, from the fuel sump, and you should be fine. And everything was fine. You're coming in, but when you're coming in for final, they drop their gear. You start pitching up. It's a delta. It's a double delta. And when they did that, the sump emptied out, both engines flamed out, and they punched out.
All right.
And there's a picture of it in my book. Quite a few books. Paul Crickmore is a fellow Blackbird fanatic friend of mine, and I just forgot where I was going with that.
Well, we were going with the unidentified objects and aircraft.
Oh, okay, yeah. I mean, my mind is about 20 different places at almost any given time.
Don't worry. I'm saying myself, Jim. I'm saying myself.
Yeah.
Write something down. I have to do it.
So I asked Dave. I said, Dave, do you believe in UFOs? And he said, absolutely, positively, they do exist. I said, you want to expand upon that? I figured he was going to say no. He said, sure. I said, oh, wow. I said, but he wouldn't let me record it. So I said, okay, what happened? He said he was on a night training mission out of Kadena, Okinawa in the far Western Pacific. It was 11 p.m. at night. He said he was at 78,000 feet at Mach 2.7. 2.7 is a sweet spot just for cruising to where you're going. It doesn't thermally stress any of the components on the airplane. It's sort of you're in cruise control. You're just leaning back, having a nice day. So it was about a 3/4 moon. That's on the left side. Everything is normal. And all of a sudden, Dave said they got a glint off something reflective, not necessarily metallic, but something shiny. He said 5 or 6 miles off to his right, 5,000 or 6,000 feet above him. So I called Kadena on secure voice to see if they had another Blackbird up. And he said, well, you were briefing today. He said, no, you're up there by yourself. He said, no, I'm not. We'll go take a look. So he advances. Now the throttles are right at minimum burner. He advances the throttles about a 10-degree bank, and he's never taken his eye off the object. And he's banking. He's starting to climb. And he figured he was still a couple thousand feet below the airplane and maybe a mile or two away. And he said he couldn't determine the shape of the craft because it was blocking out stars. He had too much reflection in the cockpit on his visor, and he didn't want to open his visor in case something went, oh, what was that? Now Bob Dylan used to fly with his visor open all the time, and he had a thing in there where it would close if the cockpit pressure started to drop. It would immediately come down the latch. So he's not taking his eyes off the object, and he can't determine the shape, but he said it had edges to it. It wasn't a round surface because he'd get a glint here and then a glint over here or whatever. So like I say, when he was still a mile or two away and a couple thousand feet below it, this thing took off at about a 30-degree angle of attack, and he lost sight of it going through between 180 and 200,000 feet. It's 1962. That's correct, so 72, 73. So fast forward to 1979, Dave retires. Blackbird program is over pretty much. And he applies for a job out of Mojave, and he ends up becoming the facility manager at Area 51. And that was primarily the reason I was interviewing him. So he said when he got there in the early part of 1980, he started asking. He said, "You don't ask questions when you first get there." But he knew most of the guys, and he said it would take. He waited a while. So after about a year, he finally asking people that he felt comfortable with, "Do we have anything out there that was flight tested here that outrun the Blackbird?" Everybody said, "Not that we're aware of." So. Later on, a couple of years later, when he was asked, he denied that he chased an SR-71, a UFO in his Blackbird, but he did. I mean,
yeah. I wonder how would that make not just the pilot, but the people who've developed this, what is the fastest aircraft in the world? I wonder if it makes them feel do you think it makes them feel inadequate, or with their capabilities and technology when this thing just accelerates away?
You had to say to yourself, what the hell was that?
Yeah. And do you have any more examples of that, Jim?
Well, I mean, my boss, when he was a major, he was a retired major general when he retired, General Wayne Gatlin. He was on alert at Duluth Air Force Base in Duluth, Minnesota. It's right on right off the shores of Lake Superior, and this is 1955, 56 timeframe. And the Air Force Station at Findlay, which is right on the north shore of Lake Superior, hits the panic button. They're tracking an unknown fast mover over Lake Superior. And so they launched 3 F-94Cs, the Lockheed Starfire, and they're over the middle part of Lake Superior trying to find this thing, and it's heading towards Findlay. General Gatlin said that they got sight of it. You put the airplane in burner, which you don't want to do. You can only do that for about 90 seconds, and you burn up all the gas, unlike the Blackbird. But his backseater, his weapons systems operator, also known as a WISO, is trying to lock on to this thing and fire. And every time he would lock on, the radar would die. And they'd pull circuit breakers, pop circuit breakers, recycle it, turn it on again. Everything's working fine. As soon as they do weapons lock, the thing dies. They did it 3 times. And they're heading towards Findlay Air Force Station, and Findlay is giving them, say, it's heading right towards us, heading right toward. It didn't go past us. I don't know what happened. We don't have it on radar anymore. And General Gatlin said they're still heading right for Findlay. And And then he says, well, the reason why you can't see it on radar, it's directly above you, hovering. So they went running outside, and as soon as they started going outside, this thing went straight up. Visibility unlimited. General Gatlin said it disappeared. Now, when I was talking to General Gatlin, this is the mid '80s. I said, okay, let's say for example, I'm a F4 pilot or an F-16 pilot, and I encounter what you just encountered. What do I do when I get back to the base? So while you go through your post-flight debrief, do whatever, then you go to the O Club, you get yourself 2 or 3 really stiff drinks, just down them, go back to your billet, and forget what you saw, because if you report it, you're going to be you're going to get the clown stamp on your 301 file or your 201 file, saying this guy's a little bit on the unconventional side, or he has too wild of an imagination. So back then, even as late as the 1980s, you had no means to report a UFO.
And do you think all that's changing, Jim? Do you think people, if we're led to believe what we're hearing on the news and the media,
it's because you have one of these. Everybody has one of these. So you could be out in the middle of nowhere. There's something come over. You don't, you're not going to be carrying your Nikons or your Canons or your Leicas around with you. You pull out your smartphone and go click. And unfortunately, smartphones or iPhones or whatever it is are really, really good for landscapes, and they're really good for people close up. But if you're photographing something 20 or 30,000 feet altitude or higher, or miles away, it's just going to be a fuzzy dot. Until someone can photograph, whether it's a TR-3B, whether it's a UAP, and I hate that moniker. It's a UFO. It's a flying saucer. It's an unknown. It may be an unknown aerial phenomena, but I think. Go on.
What do you attribute that to then, Jim? That every time they tried to lock on, I'm not. You might not have even considered. But this thing, I don't know, it failed inside the aircraft and it couldn't lock on to the UFO. What kind of awareness is there, do you think?
I mean, we, for example, the Blackbird, the SR-71 had one of their jamming systems was called Giant Fist. And if it was flying over, say you're in Hanoi, Haiphong, you have this is if you had a smartwatch, say you had an Apple Watch, Apple 5 watch, and you're looking at it. If the SR-71 flew your neighborhood and turned on its jamming system, your screen would go black.
Right.
It would disrupt really all communications in the path that it's flying around. So it would render most of the radar units not inoperable, but it would scramble their signals so bad that they couldn't fire. And the other thing that kept the SR-71 or the Blackbirds in general safe when they're flying over denied airspace is the fact that the technology of the 1960s and 1970s was even to the 1980s was such that the baddest thing they had, I'm talking about the North Vietnamese or the North Koreans or the Russians, was the SA-2 surface-to-air missile, the SAM. That had a boost glide capability. And at above 80,000 feet, you have almost no atmosphere. So those little control vanes on an SA-2 are worthless. So it's like closing your eyes and shooting up in the sky, boom, boom. You're hoping for a golden BB.
Yeah.
Now they fired Denny Sullivan overflew Hanoi Haiphong on the 27th of October 1967. And they go over, they air refueled over Thailand. They came back 43 minutes later. They're coming over Hanoi Haiphong again, and it really, really teed off the North Korea, the North Vietnamese and their Chinese advisors. So that was finding day. Next day, they, I don't know, it wasn't Denny, it was one of the other Oxcart pilots, flew the same mission profile, same altitude, same track on the 28th. And it really just irritated the hell out of the Blackbird pilot. Said you have to change routes, because if we use the same routes more than a couple times in a row, they're going to know what the time intervals are, and they'll be ready. So they didn't fly on the 29th, but they flew on the 30th, and again it was Denny Sullivan. And and what the North Vietnamese did, they sent observers out in the country. They dug parabolic trenches, and they'd lay in there with with things to help amplify the noise. Yeah. They're sitting in there with the equivalent of a field telephone, a EE8, where you crank it up and call in headquarters. They knew what the track was. So, and they knew when it flew over, they had 43 minutes that it was coming back, and they wanted to make sure they knew the track. And Denny said he was ready to strangle the guys in intelligence, because they said SA-2s don't have the capability of going above 70,000 feet. And Denny's going through there at Mach 3.3 at 90,000 feet. And if you look at an A-12, there are not many of them around, but if you look at an A-12, behind the cockpit, you'll see a little silver natural metal dome. It's about 2 inches, maybe 3 inches wide. Well, that's a camera, and it's a 16 millimeter. It's a periscope, and it's looking back. It's looking for contrails, and it's also looking for SAMs. Yeah. And recording it. And Denny said that they fired several dozen SAMs at him as he flew over on the 30th. None of them hit, but he was really pissed because they were blown up above him.
Yeah. All right.
The airplane landed at Kadena, and they did a post-flight. They found some damage to one of the composite panels on the inboard side. They sent that to CIA, and CIA said that it was part of a fusing mechanism of an SA-2 Soviet surface-to-air missile. So Denny Sullivan holds the record for the highest flying pilot to sustain flak damage ever. And he was at 90,000 feet.
Only speculation, but what would have happened if they'd have succeeded and took one of these aircraft out of the sky? Would it have just been silenced and secrecy, knowing that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, now you have to recall. I mean, I'm intimately familiar with it, but the A-12, the CIA version of the Blackbird, was retired for 20 years before they admitted the existence of this, the CIA funded one-man single place Blackbird. And it's, the A-12 is also the largest single place aircraft ever to be operational. It was 103 feet long. Gross weight was about almost 130,000 pounds, and it had only one guy, and most of it was fuel and engines.
And purely a spy plane. Was it ever weaponized?
The 3 YF-12s were carried the AIM-47. They call it a Super Falcon, and it was the grandfather to the Hughes U.S. Navy Phoenix, the Phoenix system the F-14 carried. The F-14, the Phoenix AIM-54 A through C has a fully active seeker, and about a 350 to 400 pound warhead. The AIM-47, if it had become operational, utilized a 1/4 megaton nuclear device, and it was designed to fly above a Soviet bomber formation at about 110,000 feet. And this is the AIM-47, not the Blackbird, and come down onto the bomber force and detonate above the bomber force. And what it do would literally blow the wings off the airplanes. and
Yeah.
and irradiate the entire neighborhood for about 1,000 miles downwind from where they lost the.
Frightening, absolutely
And
terrifying. And I do want to, in a well, I don't know, after Turner Howard, I'd like to talk about Bob Lazar.
Oh,
I know
absolutely.
you've knowledge of Bob Lazar, and I think a lot of people in our chat will be interested. But let's ask Les if he's got any questions, if that's okay with you, Jim.
Yep.
Yes, and thank you, Paul. Yeah, great show so far, guys. Thank you very much. I've got some great questions in the chat tonight. One of them is from Steve071, and he's asking Jim, what percentage of UFO sightings does Jim think are high-tech military testing planes?
I mean, if some of the stuff that's being shown on TR-3Bs, the Triangle, and other craft, there are formation lights on it. If there's formation lights on it, it is probably built by humans. And that's a requirement for military aircraft or even spooky airplanes. The Blackbird had anti-collision lights. They retracted. They didn't have them when they overflew target. I would say that probably between 60 and 80% of what we see are man-made or have man-made origins. And I mean, and that I'm just pulling that out of the sky because I have no basis. But ones that go back, there were UFO reports going back to the 1800s. There are UFO reports in early 47 before Roswell. There's been report, and back then I would say 100% of the crafts that were seen, if they were up close, would be of not made of this earth. Now, when Tucker Carlson and a representative from the federal government announced, was it in 2019, that there are craft not of this earth, not manufactured in this earth, that are overflying our military installations. And I was talking to Doc Skinner, who's a friend of mine. He has a program on, he lives up in Show Low, Arizona. And I mentioned that to him. I was with him when it happened, and he happened to be talking to the Cousin brothers at the time. And he said, well, said, we're trying to, and this is the Cousin brothers talking to Doc. He said, we're trying to find a guy. I think he lives in Arizona somewhere. His name is Jim Goodall. Have you heard of him? And Doc says, yeah, he's about 3 feet from me. You want to talk to him? So this was on speakerphone. He said, you know how to get a hold of Bob Lazar? And I said, yeah. He said, would you call him and ask him what he thinks? So I did. Called him up. I usually call his wife because I know she always answers. And so she said, just a second, Bob's in the lab. I'll go get him. So Bob got on, and he said, when I first heard it, I got really excited because I'm finally being validated. And then it said, it was too good to be true. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. So he was disappointed that nothing of any substance was shown
Right.
During that event.
Have you another question, Les?
Yes, yeah, thanks for that, Jim. Dragon Noir is asking, does Jim believe alien technology has been used in these planes?
Well, in the UFOs that are being spotted, if they're man-made, I would have to say yes, just based on what Bob did at S4. But there's I'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Right, yeah, thank you,
Let me just ask you a question, Les. Have you ever been given any information then that you just simply can't talk about?
No. And I've had people say, well, what are you keeping from us? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Because if it's up here and I die of a heart attack or a car crash or for unknown reasons, maybe I said something nasty about Hillary and all of a sudden I have a heart attack or died, given a baby or whatever. I just,
I asked it based on the reply to your last question, and you went, "I'll just leave it at that." And I thought, is there something
Okay.
there? And
No, no, absolutely nothing. If I have it, if something comes to me, or I hear something, and I can verify it, I know who it's coming from. I share that
yeah,
because
excellent.
if I were to walk out of this office right now to go hit the bathroom and I have a heart attack, everything that's up here is gone.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, thank you. We'll go with Les again. Let's go, Les. Thank you. Thanks.
Yes, it's just a quick question for you, I think, Paul. This one is Mark Egan is asking any recent UFO sightings in the Manchester area, Paul, if you'd know the answer to that one.
We've not had anything. We're getting sightings and all sorts of reports from all over the place, all over the world now, to be quite honest. I spoke to Don and I spoke to Les today about some strange cryptid sighting that somebody's told me about in Sweden, and I will be talking at length again on Sunday to these people because it's an interesting one nevertheless. But no, and I've got nothing in Manchester. So if Mark's got any information and he wants to share it with me, email it to us later or get in touch with me any other means that you want, really, Mark. Thank you.
Okay, I've got a question from Matt C. Has Jim ever touched the F-117, and if so, what does it feel like?
I've sat in the cockpit of an F-117. I was the first person to photograph it, and that's an interesting story on its own. I have a lot of dear friends that go back 30, 40, 50 years. One of them is the late John Lear. He just passed away this last March. And they had in November of 88, they announced the existence of the B-2 stealth bomber and the F-117. The B-2 was no big thing as far as I was concerned. The F-117 was kind of exciting because it was weird. But the only photograph they had was taken from a tanker. It was backlit, and they used a telephoto lens, which compressed everything. So you really couldn't get a true shape of the airplane. So it was, Lear knew that they were flying on a Tonopah test range. They had moved over from Area 51. You can't have an operational Air Force unit at Area 51 because operational guys, men and women, they're assigned to a base from 2 years to 4 years, and then they rotate out. And there's no way they could control the security. So they needed a permanent secure base to operate the F-117s. So they built Tonopah Test Range. And initially it was just going to have, 2 airplanes per hangar. And I think it was Rumsfeld who said that's not adequate. We need to have enough hangars for one airplane in case the one in front is, it didn't make any sense. So they built another group of hangars. There's about 60 hangars there. But they had, we knew that they were flying out of Tonopah Test Range, and I had never been there. John hadn't either, but we were adventurers. So we're heading up US 95 out of Las Vegas, and we had just passed Scotty's Junction, and Scotty's Junction is sort of infamous for it. It's a location where they had a legal house of ill repute, also known as a whorehouse, and they didn't pay. Apparently, they were not paying the taxes they were supposed to take. So the federal government took over the operation, and they ran it out of business. How can you run a house of ill repute out of business when you have more than enough customers and willing participants? So that's what makes Scotty Junction is sort of famous. And if you drive there, the trailer compound was still there. Last time I was there, it was pretty bad shape. But we're about 10 or 15 miles north of Scotty's Junction, and an F-117 flies right across in front of us, about 1,500 feet above ground level, about a 45-degree angle across the road. I almost crashed the car. Here's this thing. I mean, when you see an F-117, it has a shape that doesn't correspond to airplanes when you're depending on how and where you look at it. So we stopped in the town of Tonopah, grabbed a quick bite, and then headed out east on US 6. It's about 14 miles to a big sign. It says Tonopah Test Range, Sandia Corporation, and some other stuff. And on top, they have a B-43 nuclear weapon shape attached to the booster of a Nike Ajax, and that's right on the road. And it's 18 miles from the main highway US 6 to the main gate at Tonopah Test Range. We got there, and very busy place. You have they call the man camp is right there at the main gate. Even though I'm retired military, I can't access a secure location, a classified location. So we drive down the fence line, which is in public lands. It's to use the initials, get people confused. It's BLM, it's Bureau of Land Management controlled. And we drive about 2 miles down, and you look down on the entire base. I mean, it's right there. It's 8 miles away, and you're looking down on it, and you can see almost a bug was flying. You can see almost the entire facility and anything that takes off and lands. And I look to the north, and I see a big smudgy black thing with a white dot light, then a little bluish white thing with a little white dot right next to it. And I said, that's got to be an F-117. Now, this is the first week of January of '89. This is before digital cameras. Normally, I shot with Kodachrome, either 64 or 25, and that would be a 10-day turnaround. But this time, I'm shooting print film, Kodacolor 100, fine grain, good color capabilities. And I had a Nikon with a reasonable, a Nikon 200 millimeter lens. And I'm sitting there, shooting away from the distance. It's getting closer. All of a sudden, I can see the entire airplane. And it was like I was a 10-year-old boy seeing a naked woman for the first time. My whole body was vibrating. It wouldn't stop vibrating. And I went through all 36 exposures. And I'm saying to myself, I hope there's at least one that isn't blurred, because I could not stop from shaking. It flew over us. We got excited. Said, John, let's get the hell out of here. Let's get back to Las Vegas. Back in the 70s and the 80s, we had things called photomats. They were taken over by coffee baristas today, but you go into a parking lot of a shopping center, there was a Kodak colored little shack, yellow top, almost like a small McDonald's as far as the colors go. And you drop your film off, and you wouldn't even have to get out of your car. They'd hand you an envelope, you put your name on it, they give it back, come back the next day and get it. But I knew the photomats would be closed by the time we got back to Las Vegas. So we stopped for a bite at the Little Alien in Rachel, Nevada. Joe Travis was alive then, so it was Joe and Pat Travis. And then when we finally get back to Las Vegas, it's after 9 p.m. And I knew all the photomats were closed, and I was really disappointed. And John Lair said, well, I have a new friend coming over. He just moved here from Albuquerque. He's interviewing for a job out in the desert. Okay, it's always good to know. So about 10 minutes after we got there, knock on the front door, Lair goes to answer it, rings, and we're in John Lair's study. And someone should recreate that in a museum somewhere as someone, this is someone who is really focused on UFOs and crazy things and things that go bump in the night. The young man comes in, introduces himself as Bob Lazar. He's interviewing for a job out in the desert. Prior to coming to that, he was a physicist at Sandia Labs in Albuquerque, where he worked to develop, increase the yield of nuclear weapons as far as pennies per fatality. And I told him what my dilemma was. I had this print film with F-117 photos in it. What do I, and I have to wait till tomorrow to get it processed. And it was really, really frustrating. And Bob said, well, I have a C41 processor at home. I develop film for realtors. That's what I do before, waiting to find out if I have the job out in the desert. Said, we can process it at my place. I live off of West Charleston. So I said, let's go. So jumped in Lazar's car, and we're heading over to his place. And we're about a block away. He looks at me. He said, I feel sorry for Lear. I said, what do you mean? He said, that dumb son of a bitch, he believes in UFOs. I mean, my God, I said, his dad, I mean, he's this world famous aviation family, and his dad brought Learjet to the world, not counting everything else that he brought as far as aviation related. He said, and the dumb son of a bitch believes in UFOs. How stupid is that? He says, I'm a nuclear physicist. If I can't prove it mathematically or touch it, it doesn't exist. I said, you could put a gun to my head and you couldn't convince me that UFOs were real.
So this is what Lazar's telling you, obviously,
yes.
prior to taking the job.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. He was a non-believer.
Yep. So obviously we'll get to some of that, but we've got to see what happened with these photographs first. When they developed, did you get a good photograph?
Oh yeah, I had. There were only about 3 of them that were sharp. Right. But one of them, I got it on the cover of Aviation Week. You have a T-38, and behind it was an F-117.
Excellent. Okay. Well, we can either take some more questions, Les, or we can carry on with Bob Lazar. So
we can go on with. You can go on with Lazar. That's
yeah. Okay. So he's telling you, he's I suppose tongue in cheek saying John Lear believes in UFOs and the guy's crazy because they don't exist.
Yeah, I mean, and like say, for Lazar to say, hey, I don't believe in UFOs, and there's nothing you can do to convince me that they're real, tells me a whole lot. I mean, he came, a year later is when he came out silhouetted, and he did it because he feared for his life.
Yeah,
he'd been interrogated a couple times with a gun to his head. They didn't like what he was doing, and the people he was hanging around with, i.e., Lear and George Knapp and a few of the other guys there in Vegas. So he just he felt it was in his best interest to go public, and I think after 200.
Then Jim, give him an overview of Bob Lazar's job and what he was involved in. Obviously, so
Bob was hired to do reverse engineering on the propulsion system of one of 9 alien spacecraft. He referred to his as the sports model. It looked like a traditional flying saucer. The Tester Model Company out of Rockford, Illinois, with the help of my dear late friend John Andrews, actually did a 1/4-inch scale model, 1/48th scale model of Bob Lazar's sports model. And I don't know if it's still available. I think it would still be a good seller if it still is. Yeah. I mean, he had the interior, the 3 units on the bottom, to add to, that were the anti-gravity units. And it's just, it's taken on a life of its own. Now, one of the real telling thing, actually 2 of the real telling things about Lazar is when George Knapp contacted Dr. Edward Teller. Now, Dr. Teller was the father of the H-bomb, and Dr. Teller is the one that suggested to Bob that he interview for this job. Apparently, they had met a couple of years before that, and so he was sort of a shoe into the job. But when Teller was asked to comment on Bob Lazar, he said no comment. Now, which is important about that, just that one, those 2 words, no comment. If you're dealing with classified information, whether it's been made public or not, if you know it's classified, you can't talk about it. someone said, "Can you tell me about, what are the triggers like on the H bomb?" Or this is before the Blackbird was ever shown. How fast and how high? Those things were still classified. So you just have no comment or no answer at all.
Yeah.
If Bob was a fraud, Keller would have said, "I don't know who you're talking about. I've never met him. And obviously he's pretending." But no, they really did no comment on that request. Now, one of the things I did, I was in the Pentagon during Desert Shield and Desert Storm. At the time, I was an E6. I was a tech sergeant, and I had in my possession, with approval, I had Bob Lazar's W-2 from when he worked at S4, and I had about 90 minutes to kill on this one particular day. Everything I needed to do was, either not available yet, or I finished early. So I started. I pulled out Bob's W-2, and I'm trying to find the location, Department of the Navy, that paid him. Now in DC, you have a zip code where it's 20201 through 202. I think it's 47. In that group of zip codes is a group of classified locations. You have a zip code, I think it's above 20237 to like 42 or 43. Those go to classified locations. And this one had one of those zip codes. And I couldn't find the name of the actual name of the organization that paid Bob. So I went to I think it was Naval Investigative Services, I believe. Again, this is 30 years ago, 32 years ago. And I walk in there, I'm in uniform, and there was a young Lieutenant JG. It would be the same as the first lieutenant in the Air Force. And I said, "Sir, can you tell me where this place is located?" And I hand him Bob's W-2. Now I had blanked out his Social Security number. Which, by the way, had never been issued according to the federal government.
Did you realize you're taking a risk when you're doing this?
Yeah, I didn't care. I mean, what are they going to do to me?
Yeah. Fire away. Keep going. It's good.
Yeah. So I hand it to the young Lieutenant JG. He looks at it. He said, "Excuse me for a minute." He walks into the 2-star's office. He's in there 15, 20 seconds. He comes out. And he says, "The Admiral will see you now." Now, those are familiar with the United States Navy or the military in general. No 2-star admiral or 2-star general is going to, without an appointment, talk to an Air Force enlisted puke. And that's basically how they look at us, for any reason. So I was kind of baffled. This 2-star wanted to talk to me. I go in there and I give him a real sharp salute. And he's holding Bob's W-2 in his hand. And he said, "Sergeant, I don't know where you got this, but if I ever see your face cross the threshold of my office ever again, you'll be the most sorriest son of a bitch in NCO in the United States military. Do you understand me, Sergeant?" I said, "Yes, sir." Now, normally when you go in and talk to an officer as an enlisted person, he'll say at ease, but he said parade rest. So I'm still standing there at parade rest. And he takes Lazar's W-2 and puts it in his shredder.
Right.
And that's when he says, "You're dismissed." I gave him a sharp salute, walked down and said, "Whoa, was that an experience and a half?" That, to me, that verified that Bob Lazar is real.
Yeah.
The other thing.
What he was saying was legit. That's what we're saying, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, if Bob Lazar's W-2 was a fake W-2, if he wasn't who he said he was, I would have never had that not interrogation, but slapdown from a 2-star admiral.
No. And was it George Knapp that found some information that showed that he'd lived in the places he'd lived in, phone book directories? And
yeah, George went to Albuquerque, because that's where Bob said he lived for a couple of years, or a bunch of years. and he got access to the public side of the Sandia labs library. So he finds a directory when Bob said he worked there. He takes the directory, he opens it up, finds Robert Lazar, and there is Bob's name. In the room he said he worked in, I also looked up the 2 or 3 other guys that worked in his lab. They were assigned to that same thing. So right there, that proved that someone named Bob Lazar worked at Sandia Labs. At the same time, George is going through paper archives, because Bob said the local, I don't know if it was the Sandia newspaper or it was the Albuquerque newspaper, but one of them did a story on him. Bob had a jet-powered drag car go through 1/4 mile, 0 to 300 miles an hour in 4 seconds, 5 seconds, and it had a Lamborghini Countach body on it. So he was written up by the local paper. It said, Professor Bob Lazar, works designing nuclear weapons during the week, and to relax on weekends, he goes 300 miles an hour in 1/4 mile. And there's a picture of Bob standing in front of his jet-powered car. That is a newspaper. They wrote it up because he is who he says he is.
So it's conclusive that he is who he says he is. Yeah, that's so. You've spent time with Bob Lazar.
Yes.
So, how extensively have you spoken about the UFO subject? Has he said where he believes, or what he believes the origins of what he worked on, where these things come from?
No, we've because everybody is hounding him for the information. I would just listen to what he had to say. I didn't push him. He was my friend. I mean,
well, I didn't know whether he'd spoken to you about it. And
one thing he did say, he said the biggest mistake he ever made in his life was going public.
Right.
Because that, he said, would he go public again if he had to do it over again? And he said, probably not, because it's really changed his entire life. It's affected everything he does. Now, I was supposed to go spend a couple of days at his house in April, but I drive a high performance car. My rear tires are 13 inches wide, and it's 430 horsepower, and it's plastic. And it was chance of snow going to, heading towards where Bob lives. And I decided, no, I don't want my 185 mile an hour car to end up in a gully somewhere or wrapped around a tree or whatever. So I had to cancel. So possibly in August, when I go on my road trip, assuming we have gas here, I'm going to go visit Bob. He's
did he change his stance then on John Lear? He must have done. John Lear was the UFO enthusiast, the UFO believer. Bob Lazar thought it was a joke early days. Did they become good friends?
Oh yeah, absolutely. When John Lear died, it was on March 30th of this year, and I've known Bob. No, correction. I've known John Lear since about 1975, so almost 50 years I've known the guy, and he is a one of a kind. There isn't anybody that can cast a shadow on John Lear. But when he died, his daughter Allie, the only person she knew how to get hold of was Bob Lazar. And he said, we have to get the word out. And she said she didn't know how to get hold of me, but she figured Bob Lazar would know how to get hold of me. So she called Bob Lazar and said, hey, John just passed away. And Bob calls me. He said, I don't know, of everybody that knows John, said, you've known him longer than anybody that I know of. So he called me, and that's when I posted it on the internet, and I get a broadcast out to everybody I know that's interested in things that go bump in the night, and stuff like that. So,
okay. might be a good time now, Jim, if you want to tell people where they can get hold of your work, your books, and then we'll go to Les for a few more questions, if that's okay.
Sure, absolutely.
I still want to talk to you about TR3B just a little bit. I'm just curious about something, but so Jim.
Okay, most of I have of my 27 books that are in print, number 28 is waiting for access to an Ohio class arsenal boat, the SSGNs, and my 29th book is in the UK right now being worked on. It's at Osprey, and hopefully it'll be out by Christmas. That is the Nuclear Navy Nautilus to Columbia class, and it's pictorial history of 227 plus submarines built for the United States Navy. My books on the B-2, my books on the Blackbird and the F-117, you got probably the most convenient place to find them would be on Amazon.
Okay.
Go in books by James C. Goodall, and it's Goodall, just like Jane Goodall. You know, on the
Yes. And I've just got to say, Jim, at this point, I have put the link on the description of the podcast tonight.
Oh, thank you, Les. And just right then, have you ever thought about writing a book, Aircraft and UFO Encounters?
No, because I don't have enough information to satisfy my desire.
But that's fair. But I would have. I mean, obviously, I can't steer you any direction, Jim. You'll do exactly what you want to do. I can tell that. But you've got enough contacts, military, to ask the right questions, to find some answers, to make something really interesting.
On June 3rd last year, I was at the Lockheed Skunk Works doing a book signing for my 75 years of Lockheed Skunk Works. And I was a guest of Jeff Babion, who he retired here earlier this year. He is the vice president general manager. He is the head skunk. And I went there to do a book signing. We went and saw some non-classified stuff, primarily on U2 there at actual Skunk Works. And then we headed over to and I got a photo of me standing on the work platform for the X-59, the sonic boom evaluation aircraft that will fly pretty soon. So we finished that. We're heading over to Site 2, where the U2s are, and where they actually had all the A-12 stored. And when they were still operational, that was the SR-71 overhaul facility. And we're heading over there. We're in the back of the limousine. I'm about 2.5 feet from my head to Jeff Babion's. I looked him right in the eye and I said, excuse me, okay, Jeff, how much alien technology is utilized in some of the Skunk Works programs? And he looked at me straight in the eye and he said, I have absolutely no knowledge of alien technology. If he was a politician, I could probably say, well, he's a lying SOB, but he's not a politician. And he looked me straight in the eye. Usually if someone is telling you a big one, they're looking everywhere but straight in the eyes. He said, it doesn't mean that's something that was produced before I got here. And it's so deeply classified that I have no knowledge of it. And he said, and my job is not to look back. My job is to look forward into the future. So, that was a real reasonable explanation. He said, personally, I can't imagine that we're the only ones. But as far as Lockheed and the Skunk Works is concerned, they do not have a stand on UFOs. They will not. We have no comment because we don't have anything to base it on, or at least nothing that they want to tell us about.
No, well, thank you.
Yeah. So that right there is from their perspective. Now, I mentioned this on a podcast shortly after I had my interview, and I sort of started getting the cold shoulder from Skunk Works, ever since. So I may have stepped on any access and threw it out the window by commenting about Jeff. but it was a legitimate question, and he gave me, I thought, was a reasonable answer.
Yeah. So in the years then that you've been looking at the aircraft and all the different types of aircraft, have you never had pilots come to Jim Goodall with accounts and stories?
Uh, the only one of any note, of course, is Dave Fruhoff and General Gatlin.
Okay.
And I know airline pilots who have seen things that they weren't sure what it was. I've been out in the desert at the fence line of Area 51 or Tonopah Test Range on 80 plus different occasions. And I can remember being out in Tippecanoe Valley, which is just east of Area 51. I'm right next to the black mailbox. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you guys can read minds. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking as hard as I can, saying, if you can read my mind, abduct me, but let me bring my camera. And I mean, it got so dark when the sun went down. It was just a crescent shaped, moon, I should, moon, and the moon was going behind the horizon. Until my eyes adjusted, it was so dark I couldn't see my feet. And I was out there for hours, just hoping to see something, to hear something. And it's just,
You didn't.
I didn't. No, and I was disappointed. Now, one of the things I mentioned earlier, that I spoke with Ben Rich once a quarter for 25 years. And when he retired right after the first bombs were dropped on Baghdad in his baby, the F-117. And he was at UCLA. It was a post-grad conference from out of the aeronautical department. And he was the keynote speaker. And one of the things he said that at the end of his talk, and it was prepared, it wasn't off the cuff, he said, "We have the ability to take ET home." Think about that statement.
Yeah.
We have the ability to take ET home, but it's buried so deep in classified programs, our government will not release it. I mean, that's a mind blower. Now, he said that to the aeronautical grads at UCLA. I talked to him 10 days before he died. He was at USC Medical Center. He had esophageal cancer, probably brought on by breathing the nasty chemicals used in low observable solvents and whatever. We're talking about a bunch of other things, and my late friend John Andrews, and he said, "Jim, we have things out in the desert." Now this, he wasn't referring to Area 51. He said, "We have things out in the desert that's 50 years beyond what you can comprehend." And I can comprehend a whole hell of a lot.
That was actually going to be my next question. The technology, how far in advance are we?
I mean, this is 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. He said, and if you've seen movies like Star Trek or Star Wars, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort. I said, "Ben, you want to expand upon that?" And very typical Ben Rich, he said, "No." And the guy had the nerve to die on me about 10 days later. And I was really sad, for him to go, because he was my key to a lot of stuff. Yeah. He's the reason I got an A-12 Blackbird for the Minnesota Air Guard Museum in Minneapolis. I mean, he called me. Go on.
Sorry, no, stop, Jim. It's flight. Carry on. Sorry.
He called me in August of '89 and said, "Jim," said, "the Blackbirds aren't going to make it through Congress." And he knew I was one of the key people at the Minnesota Air Guard Museum. He said, "If anybody can scrounge one, it's you." Says, "Okay, I'll start the ball rolling." I mean, this was not, the threat on the Blackbird program was not known to the general public or most everybody in the Air Force. So I picked up the phone and I call the adjutant general in the state of New York. Now, and I had, my military service was 5 years active duty, a 10-year break, and then the Minnesota Air Guard is a traditional weekender. So I call up the wing commander. No, I call up the adjutant general of the state of New York. He's in charge of the Army and the Air National Guard for the state of New York. And I get hold of his secretary, answered the phone, General Weaver's office. I said, this is Sergeant Goodall with the 133rd. Is General Weaver available? He said, just a minute, Sarge, put you through. So General Weaver answered the phone and said, Sarge, what can I do for you? I said, sir, I got a question for you. So what's that? He said, how would the New York Air Guard like to move the world's fastest airplane in a couple of your C-5s? He said, he's quiet for a few seconds. He said, you mean the Blackbird? I said, yes, sir. He said, when you're ready, you call, we'll haul. And he said, well, put it down as training for moving outside cargo. So I went to my boss, who was a 2-star, General Schwab. I said, General Schwab, I want to get a Blackbird for our museum. He starts laughing at me. I said, General, rather than saying no, give me the opportunity to fail. He said, all right, smarty, how are you going to get it here? So I got that covered. Now, in the Air National Guard, you can violate the chain of command without getting skinned alive. Active duty, you wouldn't do that. You would go through, you'd have to go through the chain. In the Air Guard, you have 3 levels. In your active duty, you probably have 10 different levels you have to go through. You have the wing, you have state staff, and you have guard bureau. That's it. That's the chain of command. So Pratt & Whitney was trying to get a Blackbird to mount on a wind vane at their West Palm Beach engine test facility. Arnie Gunderson was heading that up. And he had contacted the Air Force and asked how much it would cost to lease lease a C-5 to move a Blackbird. And the Air Force came back and said, it's $967,000 a day plus gas. Now I scrounged, here I go again, with my hands. I scrounged 2 C-5s for 8 days each at almost $1 million a day. So and that included a CIA version of the Blackbird. And my other claim to fame, and when we finally get it, I wrote the justification letter, and we got the entire Minnesota congressional delegation to sign off on it. 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans. They've never agreed on anything before or since. And so we submitted the letter. General Schwab made sure that there was nothing in there that would jeopardize the request. And we got it. We got the okay in September, right after Saddam invaded Kuwait. So I had to wait almost a year before we could recover it. But we went to Palmdale. I commandeered a C-130. There were, counting myself, there were 14 of us. There were 4 E9s, 4 E8s, and the rest of us were either E7s or E6s. And we took that airplane apart. We flew to Palmdale with 18,000 pounds of cargo. Lockheed went out of their way to accommodate us. And one of the funny things that happened is I was at the museum one day and I get phone rings. I answer it. And they said, this is Colonel so-and-so from Secretary of the Air Force's Office of Public Affairs. I want to speak to the officer in charge of your Blackbird recovery. I said, you're speaking to him. So, well, you're an NCO. I said, yeah, I'm also a president of a French company Monday through Friday. So how can I help you, Colonel? He said, oh, I need to find some way to get access to the recovery when they load it. Well, we want to cover it. I said, I'm the person that can give you that permission. And you could tell that he was having a real hard time. I'm talking to a tech sergeant, and he's telling the colonel that if you want to get and see what we're doing, you have to ask me, and I have to tell you how to do it. And I said, send me your name, your social security number, and anybody you're going to have with you, and I'll give it to the security people at Skunk Works. And all you have to do is come up to the security office and said, I have permission from Sergeant Goodall to film and see the loading of the Blackbird into the C-5s. And he was not a happy camper. He really didn't want to do anything that was, again, it was like the 2-star.
Yeah,
I was an enlisted puke, and that's how this guy was treating me. And
well, he'd have felt undermined having to speak to you, really, wouldn't he?
oh gosh, yeah. And when you're on the flight line, you don't wear a hat, and it's a non-salute area. And I see this bird colonel coming up, and I go up to him and said, I can't remember his name. So Colonel says, "I'm Sergeant Goodall. Welcome to the Skunk Works, and welcome to the loading of the 8th production Blackbird into a New York Air Guard C-5." Now, one of my claim to fame is that Ben Rich just thought it was just a hoot. We loaded the airplane, the A-12, into the C-5. We cut the wings off at Wing Station 112. When we loaded it into the airplane, we had to take off the outboard wheels and brakes. It has a 3-wheel bogie, and loaded in. We had an 1.5 inches of clearance on the floor, the side rails. If for some reason it was getting too close, we could always put a come along in there and torque them in. And we loaded the airplane. They didn't have fuel for the C-5 at Palmdale, so we flew up to Travis Air Force Base, spent the night, got loaded up with fuel. Next morning, we're heading out. It's the 28th of October, 29th of October, excuse me.
I'm going to
1991.
Yeah.
And it was the 28th. And we're about halfway we're about 45 minutes out of Travis, heading to Minneapolis. And the loadmaster, who's a chief master sergeant, he's to go down and check the load. And I said, "Can I go with you?" He said, "Well, normally not, but since this is your baby from beginning to end, sure." So I went down to the cargo compartment. I climbed up the landing gear of my A-12 because the wings were cut off just outside the landing gear. Walked along the chine. I had a wheel chuck stuck in the canopy. The canopy is really heavy, and the counterbalance was out of nitrogen. And inside, the ejection seat was all the way down. I had put a 5-gallon bucket in there with a cushion. So I get inside the cockpit of the Blackbird, and I close the canopy, and I'm in there for about 45 minutes. And I'm just looking around saying, "This is effing unbelievable." I mean, I'm in the cockpit of a Blackbird.
You're that little boy again, aren't you? That's what.
Oh, absolutely. I know. No, I'm 77, but in my heart of hearts,
in your head you are.
But I'm either in my heart of hearts, I'm either 35 or 15, and it's usually 12 to 15.
I don't know how long we're going with that one, but I'm mindful, Jim, that we've got about 15 minutes left, and okay. I'm sure some of our listeners might want to do a few questions. Do you want to round it up and we'll go to questions? Or
yeah. So after we got back landed in Minneapolis, I called Ben Rich. So we got my baby here safe and sound. He said, "But I have a distinction that I think I'm the only person on the planet that can brag about." He said, "What's that?" I said, "I'm the only person in the world to have been in the cockpit of a Blackbird at 33,000 feet at Mach 0.72 inside another airplane."
Yeah, that's true.
And I landed it too.
Yeah. Very good.
So, okay, let's go to your other question. You have a couple questions.
Well, have we got questions, Les? Yeah.
Yes, thanks for that, guys. I've got a question from Mark Egan. Ask Jim if have we landed on the moon, and does he think there could be alien bases on the surface of the moon?
Well, yeah, we have 12 Americans that we know of walked on the moon. I think it was I was invited to a luncheon here a number of years ago, and I worked for the Museum of Flight, and I was a fill-in for my boss. He couldn't make it, and the guy sitting next to me, I didn't pay attention to the placard, his name tag, but I'm sitting at the table waiting, and people are coming in. And this gentleman sits next to me, and I turn around and introduce myself and say, "I'm Jim Goodall with the Museum of Flight." He said, "Well, I'm Buzz Aldrin." I said, "Sir, when you walked in the door, I knew that." I said, "Do you believe in UFOs?" And he started smirking, and he turned his back on me, and he came back again and just looked at me and smiled. But they said Neil Armstrong's son said his dad told him that they were being observed by humanoids, and that they had technology that he saw that was so far superior to ours. Um, was it? I think it was Mitchell who said that uh, he saw aliens and their craft and their equipment on the moon. We were observed, and it was always a question why. We went Apollo 1 all the way to Apollo 17. 18 and 19 or 20 are the three C5, the three Saturn V's that are in existence today. The one at in Houston, the one at Huntsville, and the one at Cape Canaveral. Now, Cape Canaveral is one of the most corrosive places on the planet. Hawaii is number 2, and then Guam, and I think South Africa, for some of the prevailing winds, the amount of salt and stuff in the air. So the one in at Cape Canaveral is in bad shape. But there's a reason why we didn't go back to the moon, and I don't think it had anything to do with technology. Maybe we were told that we shouldn't be there right now.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's just too many weird things that have sort of come about on why why the Saturn V program, the moon program, came to an end. So
and it must be an embarrassment, Jim, for NASA when their astronauts, highly trained, highly credible people, some of them are coming back and saying we were observed while we were on the moon. We've seen, want of a better word, alien technology, and we don't know what they are or where they're from. And how do they deny that? How it's they're actually by denial they're kind of saying that their astronauts, their former astronauts, are lying. Nobody's going to come out and admit it, are they?
No. In the early 80s, they had a UFO landing at Bentwaters there in the UK.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
And I mean, that was a big thing. The wing commander has been on record. In 1984, 85 timeframe, I'm at Cannon Air Force Base, and I've gotten permission to photograph the F-117s. And my public affairs escort, young African American staff sergeant, very pleasant. We're heading to the flight line. I said, "Well, where were you before you came to Cannon?" He says, "I was at Bentwaters in the early 80s. I said, "Oh, you were there when the UFO landed." He slams on the brakes. I mean, his eyes got as big as saucers. He sort of turned gray. And he said, you comment one more time on that, I'll have your ass thrown off this base. Do you understand me? And I said, "Yes, sir." It spooked him. I mean, it upset him that I even knew about it. Yeah.
It's never gone away, Jim, has it? The story's still as interesting and as talked about today as what it was back in the day. I've met Colonel Holt a few times, the deputy base commander, and he's still lecturing about the incident and his experience in the forest. As you'll know, you obviously know about this case.
Yes. Yeah.
So fabulous story, really, and a lot of witnesses. Interestingly, a lot of them are singing from a different hymn sheet, but I don't necessarily mean that any of them are lying, but they've all had some kind of experience in there, haven't they?
Yeah, and I mean, there are just way too many of these events to say, well, we'll just discount them. We won't give any weight to the comment.
No,
and maybe they'll go away. People asking the questions or making the statements.
Okay, sorry, Jim, come.
No, I was going to say, you got another one?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, let's have a look. I've got one from Tim Brennan. Jim, Have the pilots of the F-17s witnessed UFO phenomena?
I think most military pilots at some time, during their career have experienced something. I mean, the Navy's saying that when they're out flying, whether it's over in the Pacific or they're flying over China Lake or whatever it is, so they encounter unknowns all the time. And I have to believe that the sensors and the cameras and whatever they have on today's modern aircraft, military aircraft, they're going to come up something better than a fuzzy thing on radar. I mean, there's just, they've been pulling our chain and denying us access or verification that we're being visited. I think one of the reasons I get, or an senior Israeli scientist, I think within the last couple of years, said that they're real, but we're not ready for them yet. Now, I have a friend of mine who worked for the NSA, the National Security Agency, and in 2019, right after the Tucker Carlson and the government employee announced that there are craft not made of this earth overflying our military installations, I sent an email off to her. I said, "Hey, do you believe in UFOs?" And I got an instant response within less than 30 seconds. "Why, did you see one?" I got back, said, "No." She said, "I can't comment, especially on this platform, electronic communication, but they're here." And holy buckets. I mean, that's and there's just too many people
overwhelming,
that are qualified observers or in the know, one of the two, that to say that this is all a joke. And it's not. It's real. And I think one of the things that, one of the fears, now it's not, I don't have a fear of it, but one of the fears is the glue that keeps the world civilized is the belief in a supreme being, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Buddha, whether it's the 7-Eleven down the street. I mean, if all of a sudden people have the belief in a supreme being evaporates because the supreme being, it was actually an alien from whatever star cluster, I think the glue that holds civilized people together would come unglued. And that's one of the reasons. There are people out there, the only reason I'm not dead, I wasn't murdered, because the people that don't like me know that if not counting incarceration, they don't want to spend eternity in hell. And if all of a sudden that belief evaporates and there's no consequence, there's no eternal consequence. There's no eternal consequence for killing your neighbor or your ex-wife or whomever it is. And those of us in the first world, those of us that are educated, can accept the fact that we're not alone. I honestly believe that. But when you start going to the indigenous people, you're going into the third world, and in some case fourth world type of environments, I think that would scare the bejesus out of them, and really destroy their beliefs on a lot of other things. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of religious beliefs. But if all of a sudden the primary one that holds the glue that holds the civilized world together, if all of a sudden that belief is proven false, or maybe the people that that revere, the people that we pray to every day, maybe they are in fact aliens. I think that would upset the apple cart, so to speak.
Upset quite a few people. You're right, Jim. Right, let's fit another question in here, Les, because we're just about running out of time.
Okay.
Patricia Adams Wright is asking, Jim, have you had any UFO sightings yourself?
I have to honestly say no, and I'm disappointed in myself. I mean, I live in Southern Arizona. we don't have street lights here, and you can go in your backyard, and once your eyes adjust, you can see the Milky Way almost every night. And I'm out there all the time. I go out there I have a German Shepherd rescue dog. She just loves sitting outside by the pool, and I'm always looking up. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, everybody else I know has seen one. Why in the hell can't I? And there's got to be one somewhere. I keep my Nikon handy at all times just in case.
Yeah. So
But the only thing that I probably wouldn't be able to identify if it hadn't been made public was the F-117. You look at one straight on, and it looks like a flying saucer.
Yeah,
the head-on thing. And the first time I saw it, it looked, because of its faceting, it looked like it was changing shape. And the way the sunlight was reflecting off the facets. So
easy to misidentify then.
Yeah. So no, I'm not envious, but
No.
I would love to have the opportunity to see one. And maybe that time will happen. And I think the only way the world is going to acknowledge the fact that UFOs were real is when one lands on the White House lawn, or one lands just in front of Queen Elizabeth's home.
That's
the only way it's really, people say, I guess they are real, aren't they? Because there's a lot of people say, even with all the evidence that are out there, this is bunk, this is bull. You're seeing things, you're delusional. So
I want to get another question but we're going to extend that. But let's just try for one more question, please, Jim.
Sure.
Yes, and I think if the spaceships landed on the White House lawn or outside Buckingham Palace, I think people would be too busy looking at the smartphones to even notice.
Yeah,
probably. I mean, I lived in Hawaii for 4 years before I retired. I was a curator at the Pacific Aviation Museum in Pearl Harbor. And I lived in Waikiki. And you walk down Kalakaua, which is the main street, and there's people from all over the world at one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And they're walking around like this. I mean, they're just staring at it. They're on Waikiki on the beach, all these beautiful women in bikinis, and they're walking around like this. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense at all. So
right.
Now,
okay.
Now I have one more quickie.
Go on then.
I was a docent at Kitt Peak National Observatories outside of Tucson. Kitt Peak has the largest collection of optical telescopes in the world. They have 22 optical telescopes and 2 radio telescopes. The radio telescopes are a 12 meter and a 25 meter. And the telescopes go from 12-inch primary mirror to a 4 meter Mayhall telescope. On the 2.1 meter telescope, it was operated by Caltech for 5 years, doing remote operation and adaptive optics. And over the course of 5 years, in a very, very small area of our galaxy, the Milky Way, they cataloged 8,000 exoplanets. And just before I quit being a docent, we had a gathering at the National Optical Astronomy Observatory headquarters there at the University of Arizona in Tucson. All the maintenance people, all the astronomers, and all the docents were asked to come to the facility to have a pizza and drink event. And one of the key people from the National Science Foundation was going to talk to us about exoplanets. And this guy gets up. He had just returned from a worldwide conference of everybody studying exoplanets. And he said, based on proven mathematical formulas, we calculate that for every star in the universe, there's 1.5 planets. And out of those 1.5 planets, we calculate 2 billion, that's with a B, 2 billion Earth-like planets orbiting a similar sized brown dwarf star in the inhabitable zone with liquid water. And to quote Jodie Foster's character in the movie, Carl Sagan's movie Contact, if we're the only ones, what a waste of space.
On that note, Jim, I think we'll end it there. Thank you very much.
I've had a delightful time. You can invite me anytime you want.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll have you back, because I haven't really had to talk much at all, have I? Fabulous. Thank you very much, Jim Goodall.
My pleasure, and I'm looking forward to coming back to the UK. It's been 20 years since I've been there. I was there in April and May of 02.
We'll keep in touch.
So lovely country. You know, my name Goodall is English origin, and I'm related to the first Archbishop of Canterbury.
Excellent.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So I do have those roots,
thank you.
And my Sicilian mom, her side.
Well,
yeah.
Right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. And that was a great show. Right. So there you have it, folks. Great show tonight. I hope you found that entertaining. There's some facts and figures in there I didn't know about, and it was to me it was really fascinating. And so on that note, I've got to thank everybody who's been in the chat. I've got to thank our moderator tonight, Skyflower, for doing what seems sometimes like an almost impossible job, but done really well.
Yep.
And thank you very much. And sorry that I didn't get all the questions out.
I'll have to come back.
I did lose off. Yeah, some I did lose off my tablet here, but nevertheless, we got as many out as I could. So on that note, I've got to say thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all next time. Okay.